There are moments in life when words lose their meaning, when every explanation, every attempt to clarify only adds more confusion. It is in such moments that silence becomes not avoidance, but wisdom. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the transformation of it. When you stop speaking, something deeper begins to express itself. The energy that was once scattered through constant contact starts to settle, and in that stillness, truth slowly reveals its shape. Most people fear silence because it removes the mask. It strips away illusion. It exposes what remains when the noise is gone. When you stop contacting a man, it is not a punishment. It is a natural return to equilibrium. The connection, once filled with constant exchange, now enters a state of stillness. And in that stillness, both sides are forced to face what truly exists without the comfort of distraction. Silence is a mirror. It reflects without distortion. When you speak, your words can be shaped by desire, by expectation, by the need to be understood. But silence has no agenda. It simply shows what is. When you withdraw your voice, a man begins to hear his own thoughts more clearly. He begins to feel what your presence truly meant, not through words, but through the emptiness left behind. The silence you create becomes his teacher, reminding him of what cannot be replaced by attention or conversation. When you are always available, your energy becomes a background sound. It blends into the rhythm of his life, unnoticed, assumed, expected. But when you step back, the space you create begins to echo. That echo is awareness. It makes him realize that something that once felt ordinary was, in truth, extraordinary. Silence becomes a form of gravity. It pulls awareness inward. He begins to see not only you differently, but himself. He notices his reactions, his impatience, his confusion. He begins to question his motives, his emotions, his attachment. True silence is not passive. It is active energy. It vibrates with unseen power. When you choose silence consciously, it is not retreat. It is recalibration. You are no longer trying to control the outcome. You are letting truth unfold naturally without your interference. That shift is powerful because it removes resistance. What is genuine will remain, what is false will fade. In relationships, people often speak too soon and too much. They fill every pause with explanation, apology, reassurance. Yet the most profound transformations happen not when you speak, but when you stop. A man's mind may initially interpret your silence as rejection, as loss of control, as mystery. But over time, that silence becomes a space where he must confront his own emotions. Was he truly connected or merely entertained? Did he value your soul or only your attention? Silence asks questions that words never can. There is a deeper rhythm to human connection, a pulse that exists beyond conversation. When you remove communication, what remains is energy, the unseen bond that connects two people. If that bond is shallow, silence will expose it quickly. The connection will crumble, revealing its dependence on surface interaction. But if the bond is deep, silence will only strengthen it. It will test patience, maturity, and emotional grounding. Through absence, presence becomes more visible. When you stop contacting a man, you are not closing a door. You are opening a window for awareness to enter. The silence between you becomes a sacred space where truth can breathe. If he was only drawn to the attention you gave him, he will drift away. But if he was drawn to your essence, your silence will draw him closer, not physically, but energetically. He will begin to sense you in his thoughts, in quiet moments, in reflections he cannot explain. In this way, silence is not separation. It is purification. It burns away illusion, the false sense of control, the patterns of need and validation. It allows both people to meet each other again, stripped of performance, clothed only in authenticity. When communication resumes, it carries new meaning, deeper understanding, and cleaner energy. The space created by silence is not empty. It is full of awareness. In that awareness, truth finds room to emerge. When you stop trying to make someone see your value through words, your energy begins to speak louder than your voice ever could. Silence becomes the ultimate communication, the unspoken language of strength, peace, and clarity. To embrace silence is to trust in the intelligence of life. It is to believe that truth does not need to be forced. It unfolds naturally when given space. Silence is a bridge between the seen and unseen, the spoken and the felt. It teaches you that what is meant for you will hear your silence louder than your words, and what is not meant for you will be deaf even to your cries. When you stop contacting a man, you are not withdrawing love. You are withdrawing noise. You are letting the truth of the connection surface without interference. In the beginning, it may feel uncomfortable, like standing in the dark without a light. But the longer you stand, the more your inner eyes adjust. You begin to see what was always there, hidden beneath the sound of your own voice. Silence is discipline. It is self-respect. It is awareness expressed in stillness. Through silence, you learn that not every moment demands response, not every emotion requires explanation, and not every bond is meant to be maintained through constant effort. When you stop contacting, you give yourself permission to rest in truth, to let what is real remain, and let what was only attachment dissolve. It is in that quiet space that you begin to understand the absence of noise is not emptiness, it is clarity. The absence of words is not distance, it is depth. And the absence of contact is not loss, it is truth revealing itself in its purest form. There is a kind of awakening that only distance can bring. When two people are close, constantly speaking, sharing, reacting, the space between them is filled with movement. Thoughts, emotions, and expectations overlap like waves in restless water. But when distance appears, the waves calm. What was once blended begins to separate, and in that quiet separation, awareness starts to rise. Distance does not destroy connection, it reveals the depth of it. It exposes what remains when the habitual exchange fades away. When you stop contacting a man, you are not creating conflict, you are allowing life to show its truth. Presence can often hide in routine. When you speak daily, when you share everything, the mind stops seeing the value of it. Familiarity dulls perception. The connection becomes background noise. But once the distance begins, that pattern breaks. Suddenly, the space that was once filled with constant interaction feels like a void. That void becomes a mirror, reflecting everything that was taken for granted. Awareness often enters through absence. The absence of your words, your energy, your attention begins to echo in his mind. The things he once overlooked now carry weight. The messages he didn't reply to quickly enough, the tone he ignored, the softness he failed to appreciate, all come back in fragments of realization. Distance gives him room to feel what he could not feel when you were always near. The noise of routine kept him numb. The quiet of distance makes him feel. Many people mistake distance for disconnection, but true awareness cannot arise without space. Imagine standing too close to a painting. You see only color and texture, but no image. When you step back, the shapes reveal themselves. Distance offers perspective. In relationships, the same truth applies. When you are too close, emotions blur reality. When you step back, the mind begins to see clearly. He begins to understand not just you, but his own behavior, his impatience, his pride, his need for control. Awareness awakens slowly, but once it begins, it cannot be reversed. When you withdraw your communication, it disturbs his pattern. The energy that once flowed toward you now circles back toward him. It forces reflection. It makes him wonder where the attention went, why the warmth faded, what his part was in the silence that followed. At first, he may react with confusion or frustration. He may seek distraction or validation elsewhere. But no matter how far he runs, the mind always returns to the source of the discomfort. Distance plants a seed of curiosity that slowly turns into awareness. There is also a deeper layer to this process. Distance does not only awaken his awareness, it awakens yours. When you create space, you begin to see your own attachment clearly. You notice the impulses that once pushed you to reach out, to explain, to seek reassurance. You learn to observe them without acting on them. That observation is power. It is the moment when your emotional energy shifts from reaction to consciousness. In that silence, you grow. You realize that love and attachment are not the same, that peace and presence can coexist even when communication stops. In the beginning, distance may feel like loss, but it is actually refinement. It filters what is superficial and strengthens what is real. The emotions that were clouded by closeness become sharper in the quiet. The mind learns to listen without needing answers. The heart learns to feel without demanding return. This awareness cannot be taught through words. It must be experienced through stillness. For a man, distance becomes a teacher of humility. When the constant supply of attention is removed, he begins to notice his dependence on it. The ego that once felt powerful begins to realize its fragility. Awareness enters through the discomfort of absence. He starts to see the difference between love and validation, between care and control. He begins to sense the quiet truth that what he feels in your absence is not weakness, but recognition. Recognition of the energy that once surrounded him, supported him, and now leaves a silence too profound to ignore. When awareness awakens, perception shifts. He may start to notice the energy you carried, the peace you brought into conversation, the subtle strength behind your softness. These things are invisible when taken for granted, but distance turns them into light. What was once assumed now becomes remembered, valued, and missed. The realization may not come as a sudden spark, but as a slow unfolding, a thought that visits at night, a memory that lingers, a presence that refuses to fade. Distance also cleanses emotional energy. It resets the balance between giving and receiving. When you step back, you are not withholding love. You are restoring alignment. You allow both sides to breathe. Awareness does not flourish in dependency. It needs oxygen. It needs room. By creating distance, you stop feeding the cycle of reaction and start nurturing the field of reflection. The awareness that grows from this silence is pure. It carries no demand, no control, no fear. This awareness is not limited to the other person. It transforms you as well. You begin to see that your energy does not need to chase to be felt. You understand that what is truly connected will remain connected, even through silence. Distance becomes a test, but also a sanctuary. It teaches patience, detachment, and inner peace. You start to see that real connection is not maintained by constant words, but by unseen understanding. The energy that exists between two people does not vanish with silence. It deepens when allowed to breathe. When distance enters, awareness follows. The man who once overlooked your presence begins to feel it in your absence. He begins to listen to the silence between your words and realize that what you offered was never just attention. It was energy, sincerity, and presence. And as his awareness expands, he starts to understand what was always there but hidden beneath the noise of routine and familiarity. Distance, then, is not the end of connection. It is the awakening of perception. It teaches that closeness without awareness is blindness, and separation without understanding is illusion. When distance arrives, it is life's way of slowing things down so truth can surface. It shows who truly feels, who merely reacts, and who is capable of seeing beyond the surface of interaction into the depth of energy that binds two souls. The nature of the human mind is restless. It chases, it desires, it holds, and when something slips from its grasp, it begins the endless search to reclaim it. The mind does not easily accept loss. It remembers what once brought it comfort, validation, or pleasure, and when that presence disappears, it begins to circle around the absence like a traveler searching for light in a place that has gone dark. When you stop contacting a man, this principle quietly begins to unfold. At first, he may not notice. The absence may feel like a small ripple, barely touching the surface of his thoughts. But as time passes, that ripple grows, and the mind begins to feel the emptiness left behind by what it once had. The mind seeks what it has lost not because it truly values it, but because it cannot tolerate uncertainty. It craves familiarity. It is addicted to what it once knew, even if it never fully appreciated it. When you were present, your words, your attention, your energy became part of his daily rhythm. You were woven into his routine like background music, always there unnoticed until the song stops. And when it stops, the silence feels uncomfortable. The mind begins to replay the melody, trying to recall its warmth, its flow, its comfort. This is how awareness begins, not through the presence of something new, but through the absence of what once felt ordinary. Loss has a strange intelligence. It teaches in ways that comfort never can. When everything is easily available, the mind grows complacent. It assumes that what is constant will remain forever. But once something or someone withdraws, the mind becomes alert. It starts asking questions: where did it go? Why is it gone? Did I take it for granted? In this questioning, the first layer of awareness begins to form. He starts to reflect, not because he suddenly became wiser, but because the familiar energy he relied on has vanished, leaving him face to face with emptiness. The mind is uncomfortable with emptiness. It will do anything to fill it, reach out, distract itself, justify or deny. But in that process, it is forced to confront its own attachment. What once seemed like control now reveals itself as dependency. When you were present, he may have believed he was in control of the rhythm of communication. But when you withdraw, he realizes that his sense of stability was quietly built around your energy. The mind that once dismissed your presence now begins to crave it. This seeking is not always immediate. At first, the ego resists. It tells itself stories to maintain control. She's probably moved on. I didn't need her attention anyway. I'm better off this way. But ego is loud while truth is quiet. Over time, the noise of ego fades and the deeper truth begins to whisper. That whisper is memory. The mind starts to recall not just moments but feelings. The sound of your laughter, the tone of your silence, the peace your presence carried, all begin to return in fragments. This is not nostalgia, it is awareness rising from loss. When something meaningful leaves, the mind experiences a form of withdrawal. It is the same process the body goes through when deprived of something it has become accustomed to. The emotions fluctuate between longing and denial, between wanting to reach out and wanting to appear unaffected. But no matter how much it resists, the mind cannot unlearn connection. It will replay conversations, imagine scenarios, and revisit possibilities. It seeks resolution, but in that seeking, it begins to recognize the depth of what it once overlooked. This process is universal. The more the mind tries to replace what it lost, the more it realizes that no substitute carries the same energy. Each new distraction only highlights the uniqueness of what was left behind. This is why silence after connection can be so powerful. It exposes truth through contrast. When you stop contacting a man, you remove the constant stream of validation and familiarity that his mind depended on. In that space, he begins to confront not you, but himself. The silence becomes a mirror in which he sees his own emptiness reflected back. The mind seeking, when observed deeply, becomes a path to understanding. Through loss, it begins to recognize what was real and what was superficial. It starts to see that value is not in possession, but in presence. When you were reaching out, your presence was energy. When you stop, your absence becomes that same energy transformed into awareness. This is why distance often creates longing. The energy does not disappear, it simply changes form. The mind feels it and cannot rest until it understands its origin. Over time, this seeking transforms into realization. He begins to see that what he lost was not merely communication, but connection, a sense of peace that came through your presence. The small gestures, the tone of your messages, the calm energy behind your words, these things begin to surface in his memory, not as details, but as emotions. The mind, which once took you for granted, now becomes haunted by its own ignorance. It begins to search not just for you, but for the feeling you brought. That is the power of awareness born from absence. This cycle of seeking is not punishment, it is awakening. The mind, through the discomfort of loss, learns to value what cannot be measured by attention or possession. It begins to understand that connection is not guaranteed, that energy once withdrawn cannot be forced back. The seeking itself becomes a teacher, showing how fragile the illusion of control really was. When you stop contacting, you allow this awakening to occur naturally. You no longer feed the mind's habit of comfort, you introduce it to silence. That silence stretches the space where truth can grow. In that silence, he begins to see that what he lost was not only a person but the balance, peace, and grounding that your energy carried. And as he seeks to fill the void, the mind starts to understand that not everything lost can be replaced, and not everything gone was ever truly gone. It still lives quietly in awareness, waiting to be recognized beyond attachment or control. There is a silent shift that happens when control is no longer possible. When you stop contacting a man, when the energy you once freely gave suddenly withdraws, something begins to move within him. Not in the outer world of action, but in the inner world of thought. Control begins to dissolve, and in its place, reflection slowly takes form. This transformation is not loud or dramatic, it is quiet, almost invisible. Yet it is one of the most powerful psychological changes a person can experience. Control is a form of illusion. It convinces the mind that as long as it holds attention, communication, or dominance, it holds power. Many people mistake control for connection. They believe that if they can predict your response, manage your emotions, or influence your actions, they have secured something real. But true connection is not maintained through control, it is sustained through awareness. And awareness cannot exist where control dominates. When you stop contacting a man, you remove the foundation of control. The conversations he expected, the validation he received, the predictability he relied on, all disappear. The structure that his ego built begins to crack. At first, this feels like chaos. The mind scrambles to restore what it once managed. It searches for ways to regain the upper hand, maybe through curiosity, maybe through silence, maybe through waiting for you to break the pattern first. But when nothing happens, When you remain still and centered, something deeper begins to take place. The ego starts to lose its grip, and in that loss, reflection is born. Reflection is not immediate. It enters quietly, often through discomfort. The absence of control feels like emptiness, but that emptiness is fertile. It becomes the soil where awareness can grow. When control is active, there is no room for reflection because the mind is too busy managing outcomes. But when control collapses, attention turns inward. A man begins to observe his own reactions, his confusion, his irritation, his longing. The same emotions he once projected outward now return to their source. This is how reflection begins, through the withdrawal of energy that once flowed outward into control. The ego does not like reflection because reflection brings truth. Truth exposes patterns, motives, fears. It reveals that control was never real power. It was merely a defense against vulnerability. When you stop contacting him, you remove his ability to manipulate the rhythm of connection. He cannot reach into your space and pull energy from you anymore. He must sit with himself, and in that stillness, he begins to feel the weight of his own emotions. Reflection begins to ask quiet questions. Why do I feel uneasy? Why do I miss what I once dismissed? What was I really holding on to? This process is not easy. When control fades, the human mind often resists. It wants to act, to fix, to replace. But true reflection requires surrender. It requires sitting in the silence that control once filled. And as he does this, his perception begins to change. He starts to see the difference between what he wanted and what he needed, between who he was when he was in control and who he becomes when he is no longer leading the exchange. That inner confrontation is not weakness. It is awareness rising from the ashes of control. Reflection has a cleansing quality. It begins to wash away illusions that control had built. A man starts to realize that what he thought was strength, being detached, being dominant, being the one who cared less, was actually fear in disguise. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing identity, fear of being seen. The absence of your contact becomes a mirror reflecting all that control once concealed. He starts to see that the power he believed he held over you was actually the power you gave him through your attention. And now, without that attention, he stands alone, faced with himself. In that aloneness, something sacred happens. The awareness that comes through reflection begins to soften the mind. The walls that control build start to crumble. The defensive tone turns into curiosity. The ego that once needed to dominate begins to question its purpose. He may not say it aloud, but internally, he starts to wonder about the connection, not from the standpoint of winning or losing, but from a genuine desire to understand. Reflection turns control into insight. What was once manipulation becomes observation. What was once resistance becomes humility. This transformation cannot be forced. It unfolds naturally through silence and distance. When communication stops, control loses its oxygen. The energy that once fed the dynamic now returns to balance. Reflection replaces reaction. The same man who once tried to steer every conversation begins to replay old words in his mind, searching for meaning. He starts to see the small ways he tried to maintain control, through silence, through avoidance, through dominance, and begins to realize that those behaviors were shields protecting a fragile sense of self. Reflection exposes this truth gently, not to shame, but to awaken. When control turns to reflection, time slows down. Awareness begins to expand. He starts to feel not just what happened, but why it happened. He senses the impact of his actions, the energy that his behavior created, and the emotional consequences that followed. He begins to connect cause and effect, realizing that control brought temporary comfort, but long-term emptiness. Reflection makes him see that true strength is not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. As reflection deepens, clarity begins to form. He starts to understand that what he once tried to control was never meant to be possessed. Connection cannot be forced. Love cannot be managed. Presence cannot be owned. These realizations come not through logic, but through silence, through the echo of your absence. Control, which once felt powerful, now feels heavy. Reflection, which once felt uncomfortable, begins to feel liberating. Through this process, the mind undergoes quiet transformation. The man who once reacted to maintain power now pauses to understand. The silence he once resisted becomes a teacher. The loss of control becomes the path to self-awareness. What he sees in reflection is not just you, but himself, his fears, his attachments, his unmet needs. And as he looks deeper, he begins to see that control was never about you. It was about avoiding himself. Reflection then becomes a mirror not of the past but of potential, a space where the mind can finally see clearly. Without the distortion of dominance or fear in the unseen world that governs human connection, everything operates according to one quiet truth: energy always finds its balance. The flow between two people is never static. It constantly moves, shifts, and transforms. When one gives too much and the other takes without awareness, imbalance forms. It may not show immediately, but energy is sensitive. It keeps a silent record of every exchange, every unspoken thought, every emotion withheld or overextended. And when the imbalance grows too large, the universe begins its natural work of restoring harmony. This is why when you stop contacting a man, the entire dynamic between you changes. The energy that was once one-sided begins to rebalance itself in ways words cannot explain. Everything you give carries vibration, attention, care, emotion, thought. When that vibration is sent continuously towards someone who does not reciprocate, the energy starts to lose direction. It becomes heavy, ungrounded, and draining. The more you chase, the more you feed imbalance. You begin to operate not from alignment, but from attachment. Yet the moment you pause, the moment you stop reaching out, something powerful begins to happen. The energy that was moving outward starts to return inward. It begins to refill you, recharging what was once scattered. Balance starts to rebuild itself in silence. Energy is not personal, it follows universal law. What you give out must eventually return in some form. When you are overinvested in someone who is underinvested in you, the balance is broken. Life, being intelligent, will not allow this imbalance to continue forever. It introduces situations, distance, or silence to bring things back into harmony. When you stop contacting a man, you are not punishing him. You are allowing nature to correct the flow. The excessive giving stops, the overreaching pauses, and the exchange starts to stabilize. For the one who was receiving more, the shift feels sudden. The energy that once surrounded him, your messages, your presence, your attention, disappears. What was once an effortless stream now becomes absence. That absence carries weight. It triggers awareness, curiosity, sometimes even longing. He begins to sense a void where your energy once existed. At first, he may try to fill it with distraction, but energy cannot be replaced with substitutes. What was unique to your presence cannot be imitated. Slowly, the balance begins to reverse. The more he feels your absence, the more he sends energy toward you in thought, reflection, or emotion. The same energy you once extended outward now starts to flow back toward its source. Balance does not mean equality in form, it means equality in essence. When two people exchange energy consciously, harmony is maintained. But when one overextends, imbalance creates resistance. This resistance often shows up as emotional exhaustion, confusion, or anxiety. When you decide to stop contacting him, that resistance begins to dissolve. The silence acts as a reset button. It clears the field. Energy that was tangled starts to untangle. You begin to feel lighter, clearer, calmer. The pull that once drained you begins to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. This peace is balance returning to its rightful place. For him, the process unfolds differently. At first, he might interpret your silence as indifference. But as time passes, the deeper truth begins to unfold. He realizes that the constant flow of attention he once took for granted carried meaning. The space now feels different. The rhythm of communication, once predictable, is gone. This absence forces him to feel the contrast between what was and what is. In that contrast, awareness is born. The energy that once moved one way now starts to move both ways. What was once comfort becomes curiosity. What was once control becomes contemplation. This is how balance restores itself without effort or confrontation. In every relationship, there is a dance of giving and receiving. When both move with awareness, harmony remains. But when one dances too quickly while the other stands still, imbalance appears. Silence, distance, or separation are life's ways of slowing the rhythm so both can find the same step again. When you stop reaching out, you give the connection time to breathe. You give him the chance to meet your energy, not as a response to your effort, but as an authentic choice. Balance cannot exist when one is chasing and the other is retreating. It can only exist when both move with equal intention. Energy is self-correcting. It does not need force to find its way home. When you withdraw from a dynamic that feels draining, you create space for recalibration. The silence that follows may feel uncomfortable at first, but within it lies profound wisdom. It teaches patience. It reminds you that your energy is valuable, that it should flow where it is respected, not where it is resisted. The moment you stop trying to control the flow, balance begins to appear on its own. For a man, this shift often brings realization. The comfort of your constant presence fades, and he begins to feel the energetic vacuum left behind. That emptiness pulls his awareness inward. He begins to reflect, to wonder, to feel the imbalance that once favored him. Energy, being intelligent, seeks to equalize this feeling. It draws him toward the same reflection that you once experienced when you were overgiving. He starts to understand that connection is not sustained by attention alone, it is sustained by balance. When energy balances itself, truth surfaces. The illusions created by overgiving dissolve. What remains is authenticity, pure, simple, and stable. You begin to see that love does not require constant proving. It exists quietly in equilibrium. When you give with awareness. When you step back, you do so with peace. Energy always knows where it belongs, and when you trust that, everything begins to align naturally. This balancing process does not only heal the connection, it heals you. The energy that returns to you fills the spaces you once emptied for others. It strengthens your boundaries, clears your emotions, and refines your awareness. You begin to sense when to give and when to hold back, when to speak and when to remain silent. That intuition is the sign that balance has been restored. As energy finds its equilibrium, the need for control fades. You no longer chase what resists or cling to what drains. You begin to trust the flow. You understand that everything that belongs in your life will move toward you effortlessly, drawn not by force but by resonance. And everything that was unaligned will quietly drift away, guided by the same law that governs all things, the law of energetic balance that restores harmony to every connection, every thought, and every heart. There comes a moment when movement no longer serves growth, when chasing, explaining, proving, or reacting only deepen confusion. The more effort you apply, the further away peace seems to drift. It is in this moment that stillness calls. Not the stillness of apathy, but the stillness of awareness, the kind that doesn't come from avoidance, but from inner alignment. When you stop contacting a man, when you withdraw your voice and your energy, you are not merely creating distance, you are allowing transformation to begin. Because transformation never starts in noise. It begins in silence, in the pause between thoughts, in the space where nothing is forced and everything can be seen clearly. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it is the mastery of it. It is the point where action no longer comes from reaction but from understanding. When you constantly reach out, your energy is outwardly focused, seeking response, seeking confirmation, seeking connection. But when you become still, that same energy begins to return inward. It becomes introspective. It starts to show you where your strength lies, what you were clinging to, and what you need to release. This is where transformation starts, not through trying to change another person, but through the awareness that arises when you stop trying. The human mind finds stillness uncomfortable. It equates silence with loss, inactivity with weakness. Yet true strength lives in restraint. When you stop contacting someone, you challenge your own impulses. You teach yourself patience, self-trust, and emotional balance. The first few moments of stillness may feel heavy because all the suppressed feelings come forward. The longing, the doubt, the fear of being forgotten. But if you remain still long enough, those emotions begin to dissolve. Beneath the turbulence, there's a quiet layer of peace. It has always been there, waiting beneath the noise of attachment. Transformation in stillness begins with surrender. It is not a surrender of dignity, but of resistance. You stop fighting against what is. You stop trying to control outcomes, conversations, and perceptions. You let go not because you no longer care, but because you finally understand that peace cannot coexist with struggle. In that surrender, awareness grows. You begin to notice how much of your energy was spent on trying to hold together something that was never meant to be forced. Stillness teaches that what is meant for you does not need to be chased. It will remain even in silence. When you stop communicating, the silence becomes a teacher for both sides. For you, it teaches self-reflection. For him, it creates contrast. He begins to feel the difference between your presence and your absence, between your energy when it flowed freely and the quiet space left when it retreats. This awareness is part of his transformation too, but it can only occur when you stop feeding the connection with constant movement. Stillness allows truth to surface. It gives both of you the clarity that cannot emerge in the chaos of constant contact. The mind often believes transformation comes from doing, from reading more, speaking more, fixing more. But the deepest transformation happens when you stop and observe. Stillness reveals patterns. It shows you the places where you gave from emptiness, where you spoke out of fear, where you tolerated imbalance. It teaches discernment, reminding you that love without peace is not love, it is dependency. Through stillness, you begin to remember who you were before the noise. You return to your natural rhythm, the one that existed before the external world taught you to seek validation outside yourself. Stillness is the ground where emotional maturity grows. When you are still, you become aware of your own reactions. You learn to witness your thoughts without acting on them. You begin to see how easily the mind tries to pull you back into old cycles, to text, to explain, to make things right. But stillness says, wait, watch, feel. In that waiting, the emotion loses power. The need for validation fades, replaced by understanding. What was once reactive becomes reflective. This is the subtle yet profound transformation that silence brings. As time passes in stillness, your inner world begins to expand. What once felt like emptiness now feels like space. The silence that seemed heavy begins to feel healing. You start to hear your own voice again, the quiet, honest one beneath the noise of desire. You realize that peace was never missing. It was simply buried under too much effort. In stillness, you recover that peace, and with it, your strength. The energy you once poured outward now nourishes you from within. You begin to glow differently, not from validation, but from alignment. Stillness also rebalances perception. When you are constantly active, you view the situation from the surface: who texted, who didn't, what was said, what was left unsaid. But when you become still, you start to see the energetic truth beneath the surface. You notice how your peace was dependent on external response, and you learn to reclaim it. You realize that your worth was never tied to anyone's attention. It was only hidden behind the noise of wanting to be seen. Stillness brings back that self-recognition. It restores the natural balance between giving and being. Transformation is not a single moment of revelation. It is the slow unfolding of awareness. Each day you remain still, a little more clarity appears. The fog of confusion begins to lift. What once felt like rejection turns into redirection. What once felt like silence from the other becomes a conversation with yourself. The pain that once felt unbearable turns into understanding. Stillness does not erase emotion. It refines it. It teaches you how to feel deeply without losing yourself in the feeling. For the man on the other side, this stillness becomes a mirror. Without your voice, he is left with his own. Without your energy, he must face his own emptiness. This reflection often brings realization. Realization of what was taken for granted, what was misunderstood, what was unbalanced. But these realizations cannot be given through conversation. They must be found in the quiet. Just as your stillness transforms you, it also transforms the connection itself. What was once built on reaction now has the potential to evolve into awareness. Transformation through stillness is subtle but irreversible. Once you experience the power of silence, you no longer crave constant motion. You begin to trust the rhythm of energy instead of the timeline of emotion. You understand that everything unfolds in divine timing when you stop trying to force it. Stillness becomes your teacher, your boundary, your strength. It turns longing into peace, confusion into clarity, and attachment into freedom. It shows that nothing external can define your value, and that all true transformation begins not in the noise of pursuit, but in the quiet depth of stillness